Hello to all of you. So welcome to my course Biology 1101. So this is the chapter for this week. We are going to do chapter number 1, and this chapter is about science, what is science and how science is done. So basically, what is science? Science is a method to answer some questions, and it's basically a way of knowing, and we can also call it a process of using observations and experiments to draw evidence-based conclusions. So basically, it's a way, it's a procedure to know the truth, and there are steps how science is actually conducted, and that's what we are going to talk in this chapter. Something very important to know about science is evidence-based. Okay, science works, or the scientists in the scientific community are going to accept any only if you have an evidence which is in the form of the data. So this is very important thing to know about science, that science is evidence based. Another important thing I would like to tell you about science is, or scientific method is, the scientific method is not only followed by the scientists in the lab. Okay, now science can be done in the labs, it can be done outside in the fields, but something very important to know here is science is not only done by the scientists in the lab or in the fields, but science is actually done by all of us in our daily life. For example, now I'm going to give you an example. Now suppose this is a girl, so she observes her flashlight is not working. So this is her observation. Now the next thing is, question will come to her mind, why her flashlight is not working. Then to answer this question, her mind is going to give some explanation. Now, and this answer to the question in mind is called the hypothesis. So she can have two answers to this question, why my flashlight is not working. It can be maybe the battery is dead, or it can be the bulb is burnt out. Okay, these can be these two answers to this question. Now, so these are the answers. Now, these are the answers in her mind. Now, to answer these questions, she has to actually test them. How she is going to test? Now, maybe to test this first hypothesis, she may replace the battery. Okay, when she replaces the battery, now the flashlight is still not working. Okay, so it means that this hypothesis was wrong. On the other hand, now she is trying to test the second hypothesis. She is trying to check her bulb, and she replaced the bulb. Now when she replaced the bulb, the flashlight started working. It means her second hypothesis is the correct one. So basically, this is a method we follow in our everyday life. Okay, so scientific method is not followed only by the scientists in the labs or the fields, but it's actually followed by our daily life. So basically, we all observe. Okay, for observation, we have been given some senses, like we have eyes, nose, ears, we hear things, we smell things, we see things. So we observe, and when we observe, a question comes to our mind, and to answer that question, we make a hypothesis, and then we test the hypothesis. And on the basis of the results we get, we figure out which hypothesis is correct. So if, like in this case, she has made two hypotheses. So if the first hypothesis is not correct, then she tried the, it means the first hypothesis was rejected, and then she tried the alternative hypothesis. So these are the steps of scientific method. Okay, so these are the steps of scientific method. You observe something, then a question comes to your mind, and to answer that question in your mind, we make a hypothesis, and on the basis of hypothesis, we make some predictions, and then to test our hypothesis, we perform some experiments, or we observe some things, and on the basis of the results we get, we are going to make some conclusions. We make the conclusion that yes, this first hypothesis was correct, first hypothesis is supported. If the first hypothesis is not supported, which means the results are not supporting the hypothesis, then we reject the first hypothesis. So when we reject the first hypothesis, we try the alternative hypothesis. And if the first hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis is supported, then we need to perform many experiments to see if those many experiments which we are doing from different directions, if they actually support the if they support our hypothesis. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if by one experiment our hypothesis is supported, then we need to do many experiments to in that direction to prove the hypothesis. And if all the experiments they support the hypothesis, then that hypothesis or that facts become a theory. So what a theory is, a scientific theory is that fact which has been supported by lot of evidence. So this is the overall process of science. These are the steps of scientific method. Now here I would like to give you one example. So we are going to follow a case study. So basically you must have studied, we all drink coffee. It's a very good stimulant. So so basically if you look at the picture of this coffee beans, this is a cup of coffee. So and we also have read in the news that coffee can cause cancer, coffee can prevent some diseases, and coffee can be poisonous. So basically, so we all I mean there are conflicting reports in the news. Some say coffee is good, some say coffee is bad. Coffee causes cancer, coffee prevents some diseases, coffee can be poisonous. So now here are some of the important reports which say coffee is good for us, like coffee can fight liver disease, it can lower the risk of colorectal cancer, it can protect against type 2 diabetes, protect against Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, it reduces the risk of depression. Coffee is bad for us, it can be addictive, increases anxiety, can increase cholesterol, elevate blood pressure, and may increase the risk of heart disease. So these are the conflicting reports we hear, right? So some reports say coffee is good for us, and all these reports which we read in the journals, like in the peer-reviewed journals or in the newspapers. So they, I mean, especially in the peer-reviewed journals, they are on the basis of scientific results. So how do we understand that some of our studies say coffee is good, some of our studies say the coffee is bad? So how do these conflicting reports do we get, which are basically evidence based, which are basically scientific evidence based? So basically the reason is, see, if there can be two labs which can be reporting two different results, yes, because there are reasons for that, because the conditions under which those experiments were done, they can be different. Okay, the reagents used were different. There can be many reasons because of which we can get conflicting reports. Now in the case of coffee, why we can get different results? These are the factors which can contribute to conflicting results. The amount of coffee a person drinks, that can be different. The gender, age, and the general health of a person can be different. Because of that, we can get different reports. Social factors such as eating and smoking, that are often associated with the coffee drinking, that can affect. Then the chemical makeup of the coffee beans. Basically, the coffee beans are also different. Like the Starbucks use different coffee beans, Dunkin' Donuts use different beans. So they can the chemical makeup of the coffee can also be different. Maybe the study design which was made, that can be flawed, that can be maybe incorrect, possible. So these are some of the reasons because of which we can have different results. So basically in scientific studies we use best evidence which is available, and it is also important to ask if the science was performed properly. And also very important thing to know about science is never ending process. So basically, science is a process, and the first step in scientific method is observation. Okay, so scientific process starts with an interesting informal observation, and it is experience. Okay, anecdotal evidence means some evidence which is on the basis of the experience of a person, which can vary from person to person. So the first step in scientific method is observation, and we use observation to devise a question. Now if you look at this picture of the coffee, so we can like if you look at this picture, we observe that coffee is like stimulant. Some people like the aroma of coffee. So basically, if you look at this picture, it gives us a feeling that coffee is a stimulant. It boosts our energy. So making this observation, we can ask a question: does coffee boost energy? So the second step in scientific process is we ask a question. And also when we actually do the scientific projects, I'm not talking about the daily life. When we do the scientific projects, we have to go and read the literature. Okay, we have to go and read the peer-reviewed scientific papers which are published, and then we get some background information about about the question we're having in our mind. So peer review is a review of an article by experts before publication. So basically, peer review is so basically, let me tell you how this whole system works. So when scientists, they perform or conduct experiments in the lab, they perform the experiments and they get the data, and then the research work is sent for publication. Okay, and then when the work is sent for publication, it is sent to the editor, and then the editor send the work to different reviewers, and these reviewers are those people who are expert in the field. So they basically go and look over at your work, and then they give the decision if this work should be published or not. That is what peer review means: review of an article by experts before publication. So there are many research papers which are published. So we can go and look for the background information, and after that we can formulate a scientific hypothesis. Now what is a hypothesis? It is the tentative or the most probable explanation to the question in mind. Okay, so we can I will tell you the important characteristics of the hypothesis. So hypothesis is a tentative or the most probable explanation to the question in mind. So the question, so we can make a hypothesis: caffeinated coffee improves the alertness. Okay, important thing to know about hypothesis is it should be testable and it should be falsifiable. Testable means we should be able to test the hypothesis. Falsifiable means that we should be able to prove that the hypothesis is wrong. Testable means, like, if you make a hypothesis, maybe my flashlight is not working, maybe some supernatural power is fooling with my flashlight, or some ghosts are doing something to my flashlight. Now this is not a testable hypothesis. So this is not a correct hypothesis. So this is what I mean. I just said okay, so hypothesis is never proven. We never say the hypothesis is proved. We always say the hypothesis was supported or it was rejected. Okay, if the hypothesis is false, it is rejected and no longer considered a possible answer to the original question. If the data support the hypothesis, okay, if the data support the hypothesis, it will be accepted. If the data support the hypothesis, it will be accepted. So we do not say the hypothesis is proven or not proven. We always say it is either supported or it is rejected. So hypothesis, so when we make the hypothesis, after that step is we do test the hypothesis, and the hypothesis can be tested by experiments. And what is experiment? It's a carefully designed test, and results of the hypothesis, they either support or reject the hypothesis. Now if you if you read in your book, it's a very nice case study about the coffee. So so we have reaching here, the hypothesis we have made is caffeinated coffee improves the alertness. So now let's follow one case study, and we are going to see how in a controlled study can be conducted to test the hypothesis, and then I will come on some of the terms. So basically, if you look, this is a case study. So in this case study, so it's a controlled experiment. So whenever there are controlled experiments, there are always two groups made. One is experimental group, another is a control group. Experimental group is that group in which we are testing something, and control group is something in which control group is that group which is for the comparison. So experimental group is that group in which we are introducing some factor, or we are trying to test some variable. Like in this case, we will be in this controlled study, it was tested if drinking coffee can prevent the daily memory decline. Okay, so in the experimental group, there were some people recruited, and they are old people. Okay, and in the control group also, there were some people recruited, and those people are also old people. Okay, so in both the groups, the age group is same number of people, but they are made two groups: experimental group, control group. In the experimental group, these people were made to drink caffeinated coffee, and in the control group, these people were made to drink decaffeinated coffee. Okay, so in the experimental group, so basically in the experimental group, the experimental variable is being tried, being checked, and in the control group, everything else is same. Only the difference is that a variable which is being tested in the experimental group is not there. So in the experimental group, like in this case, the caffeinated coffee is used. Like suppose we are trying to check the effectiveness of some drug for cancer. Okay, so in the experimental group, that drug will be given to the patients, but in the control group, that drug will not be given, but something else will be given, which is not told to the patients. So that is called placebo treatment. Placebo treatment means which means you are giving to the patients, but the patients, something is given to the patients, they do not know that they are not getting the drug actually, and in the experimental group, the drug is actually given. So the experimental group gets the test treatment, and the control group gets the placebo treatment. And control group is very important in controlled experiments, because without that you cannot compare your results. So this is a control group, this is experimental group. So this control group, the experimental group, this is drinking caffeinated coffee. So these people are actually taking some tests in the morning and in the afternoon. So what it is found that because this is a group of old people, so these old people, in the afternoon, their memory declines. Okay, so in the morning they're good, their memory is good, but in the afternoon their memory declines. So the test group, the experimental group, which is getting the test treatment, they are drinking caffeinated coffee 30 minutes prior to test in the morning as well as in the afternoon. But the control group is getting a placebo treatment, and they are getting decaffeinated coffee. So what is the difference between these? That they are getting caffeinated coffee, these are getting decaffeinated coffee, and they are drinking this coffee 30 minutes before the test, and this test is being conducted in the morning as well as in the afternoon. So in the morning, both groups are fine, because in the morning these old people, their memory is fine, but as the day goes, these old people, they tend to lose their memory. But it was found that by conducting this study, it was found that in the afternoon, the experimental group which was drinking the caffeinated coffee, their test scores in the afternoon tests were same as the morning scores. So which means that, okay, but in this case, in the control group, which were having the decaffeinated coffee, their scores in the afternoon, they were lower. So in the afternoon, their scores were lower, but with this group, their scores were staying the same. So the conclusion from this study is caffeinated coffee prevents memory decline in this population. Okay, so this is the way how the scientific experiments they're done. So the experimental group experiences the independent variable. Okay, and this independent variable is not experienced by the control group. So independent variable is that variable which is controlled by a scientist or a researcher or somebody who's trying something. So independent variable is that variable which is in our hand when we are testing something. And then there's another variable which is called a dependent variable. And what is a dependent variable? Dependent variable is that variable which changes in response to the independent variable. So we talked about what is the placebo treatment. So placebo treatment is basically a fake treatment. Okay, so basically this actually shows you the overall process of science. So basically, first of all, the very first step is the observation. So we observe something, then question comes to our mind. There can be many questions. There can be many questions coming to our mind when we observe something, and then we go and do the literature search. We do the peer review, and then we make the hypothesis. We can make various hypotheses, and then we can test those hypotheses. And for testing those hypotheses, we do the experiments, and then when we do the experiments, we get the data, and on the basis of the data, we can make our conclusions. So maybe the data is not supporting the hypothesis, which means that will be rejected, or the other chance can be the data can support the hypothesis. So when the data is supporting the hypothesis, then we need to do many more experiments to prove the hypothesis. Just by doing one experiment, we cannot be sure that the results are correct. So we need to perform many experiments, and we have to perform the experiments in many ways to we need to perform the experiments in many ways to prove the hypothesis. And then when we have lot of data, then we send the paper for publication in the scientific journals. And once the scientific fact is supported by a lot of evidence, it becomes a scientific theory. And the experimental results, they are published in peer-reviewed journals. So it's a whole process. You perform the experiments, you have the data, you send it for publication, you send to the editor sends to the reviewers. The reviewers are going to go over your work, and then they're going to decide if this work is going to be published or not. Okay, the last thing to know in this chapter is scientific theory and the difference between everyday theory. So theory word is used a lot in everyday, in our daily life. So we make many theories in our everyday, like we say, oh, maybe if I wear this dress, my exam, I will perform good in exam. If it rains, the questions on the exam will be good, right? So we just make some correlations, and we just make some theories, and these are basically everyday theories, right? Everyday daily life theories. But the theory word actually does not mean that. The theory word actually means that, or we can call a scientific theory is that fact which is supported by a lot of evidence. So in science, there are many theories: cell theory, theory of relativity, and theory of evolution. So these are some of the very well accepted theories in science. So these theories means these facts. Cell theory says all living organisms are made of cells. Cells come from cells. Cell is the basic unit of life. Then there's another theory given by Einstein. Then the theory of evolution by natural selection given by Charles Darwin. So all these facts became theory when they were supported by a lot of evidence. So that's all in this chapter. I hope you guys will enjoy this chapter. If you have any question, please let me know.